Hello, everybody. We're just going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes before we call the meeting to order, okay? So, Madam Clerk, I'm just going to go ahead and open the meeting, okay? Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to call the special meeting of the Tiburon Town Council for Wednesday, January 25th, 2023 to order. And Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Fredericks.
Here.
Councilmember Thier.
Present.
Councilmember Wellner.
You're muted, John. I don't know if...
Thank you.
Here.
Vice Mayor Griffin is absent and Mayor Ryan.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 items on the agenda today, and we can jump right into action item 1. It is about the draft housing element, and the item is to consider directing staff on desired revisions to the housing element prior to the submissions to the HCD. Do we have a staff report or presentation?
Yes, we do. Christina O'Rourke from O'Rourke and Associates will be presenting today, and I'm available for questions as well.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. Let me share my screen and get the presentation up. Okay, there we go. So today we wanted to just very briefly go over the revisions that we made to the draft housing element pursuant to the council direction that we received last week at the council meeting on January 18th. And then have a discussion and kind of present the options, some options, I should say, for meeting the RHNA shortfall that as a result of the reduction of the qualifying SB9 units. And then we would like to receive directions on changes to make to the draft housing element so that we can resubmit the draft to HCD for the next 60-day review period. So the revisions that we made, first of all, we deleted any reference to the 4th floor bonus in exchange for a ground floor commercial. That was only to be at sites 5 and 3, but we've deleted that. And then we added an action to reduce the second unit C, as the council was looking for ways to provide some incentives, which was requested by HCD in order to kind of spur a second unit development and meet the projections that we were claiming in our in the housing element. Then the other direction was to reduce, we needed to reduce the SB9 units. So we had 2 letters of interest. We used those, and then we took the remaining parcels, which was 25% of the remaining vacant parcels, and made an assumption and put in some justification for why those should be counted as SB9 units and expect to be developed over the planning period. So that would result, those 2 actions would result in 36 above moderate income units. And then we added a new program, HPP, and that is to encourage and facilitate the SB9 units through outreach and education. Also to adopt an ordinance which would amend the existing ordinance to increase the maximum unit size from 800 square feet to 1,000 square feet. And this is the actual program. The one that is in that was in the draft housing element that was an attachment. I forgot that we needed to also identify the time period for adopting an ordinance. I know that HCD will request that. So I put in adopting an ordinance by July 1st, 2023. I think that would help to kind of buttress the argument that we can, in fact, meet our SB9 projections. Then finally, we added a program to rezone 4576 Paradise Drive it's currently residential multiple plan, or no, to put it to a residential multiple plan land use designation, also require a minimum density of 10 units an acre. So this parcel is almost 9.6 acres, and there's 2 existing homes. So we could result in 93 above moderate income units if we did rezone a minimum density of 10 units an acre. So we added that site to the site inventory and also a description of that site that occurs in that section of the housing element. So when you add kind of all of this up together, this is where we are. There are 2, let's see, so the units that we already have on the sites 1 to 9 and A to G are in that first line, and the ADUs that we already have. So the way it works out is that we're projecting development of 63 single family and 2 family homes on vacant sites. And then the SB9 units are those 36 units. And then the 4576 Paradise Drive at 10 units an acre minimum would be 93 units. So you can see how it totals out. So the only thing really that's changed here is the above moderate. So we have a little bit of a buffer here. It's actually exactly the amount if we don't get to qualify those additional SB9 units. I mean, we're already qualifying the 2 that we have letters for, but if for any reason, so it works out to be 21 units. So that's how that works out. Then here is another chart that's just showing another thing that the council wanted to explore was this idea of increasing the minimum density on the sites, all of the downtown sites. So currently, we're proposing 30 to 35 units. So the question was, well, what if we increase that to 31 to 35 units? And so when you do that, not all, some of the sites just aren't large enough so that it's under a 1 unit. So that's why there's some zeros. So if we increase it to 31 to 35, we could get 14 units that way. And so you could assume that if we went to 32 to 35 units, we'd get roughly 28 units that way. It's so that's another option to consider. And that's the end of my very short presentation. Just wanted to now, I can leave this up if the council wants to refer to any of those slides, or I can close the presentation. Also happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks. And Dina, do you have anything else you're going to add, or are you going to just participate in the questions?
I think we're just ready for questions.
Okay.
Like we've laid out,
Thanks.
as you can see in our staff report, and as well in the housing element, we provided those changes in a red line. And so you'd be able to see where we did apply those throughout the document.
So Christine, for the time being, let's leave the presentation up in case someone wants to refer to it. Do any of the council members have any questions?
Yeah.
Councilmember Fredericks, please.
Yeah, this is just a quickie. In the draft, we have the response to HCD on page 8. It still refers to Site B and the CVS building. And some of the members of the public contend that the owner does not support that and we cannot include it. Can somebody update us on this?
We can't include it as a lower income site because for the lower income, we do need to have letters of interest, and the council will have to, when the council adopts, I shouldn't say we have to have letters of interest, but we have to have some indication of development interest on those sites, because when the council adopts the housing element, you're going to have to make findings that these sites are, that those lower income sites, the ones that are slated for lower income, that's why they're numbered differently. Those are the numbers 1 to 9. And then the lettered sites, A to G, are a moderate and above moderate income sites. So it's the lower income sites that the council will have to make findings saying that those sites are available and will most likely be developed during the planning period because, and it can be all of the reasons that we've kind of explained when we talk about the sites, that the buildings are functionally obsolete, that they're old, that we've increased the density thereby really so that increasing the possibility and the feasibility of development on those sites, and also that the owner is interested. We're trying to make the argument that even though we know that the property owner is not currently interested. Anything can happen over the next 8 years. That property may change hands and that there may be development. The building is older and it is functionally obsolete, especially when we increase the density. You could just realize much more economic value on that parcel by redeveloping it. And it could be a mixed use development. So that is the argument that we're making in the housing element. And we haven't had final determination from HCD about whether all of the sites that we have in are adequate to meet our RENA. So we're still working through that process. But I think HCD kind of has the final say on whether we should keep the element.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, with everything we had to read, I missed the information that the owner cooperation is only necessary in identifying sites for low-income housing.
Yes,
I
exactly.
missed that. Yeah.
Yeah, same. Thanks for clarifying that. Councilmember Wellner, please.
Thanks. I'll just start by saying I think you guys did a really good job on this revision, and we'll have more to say during the comment period. But my question is with regard to the last item that you were talking about, the proposal to increase from 30 to 31 in the range. My question is, I don't think, well, in the comment section, we'll talk about why I don't think we need that now, but with regard to the draft that we received, I just want to clarify, I don't believe you made that change, right? That's something that you would need us to say now if we wanted to make that change, right? Okay. So the draft as it currently reads includes the Paradise Drive site and includes the SB9 numbers, but does not include the change of the range from 30 to 31. Is that correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
All right. Thanks for clarifying.
Councilmember Thier, please.
Yes, thank you. So going back to the same slide, if we did add the one more unit, I just want to make sure we're not going over 3 stories on these properties.
Right, the 3-story limit, when we're talking about 3 stories, we're going to 35 units an acre. So it's just increasing the minimum. So it would not change the building height.
Okay, thank you. And then I had one more question. Could letters also be sent out to non-vacant potential SB9 sites?
Yeah, we could do that. And, for those sites, it's a little tricky. I think we would want to qualify them as we got responses, because you have to, it would probably be a lot split if it's non-vacant. And then this lot has to be split roughly equally. So it has to be 40-60%. And, a lot of the parcels, especially when you're looking down at the flatter areas, the homes are in the middle of the parcel. So to split the parcel, you would have to take down the home and then rebuild. And maybe somebody's interested in doing that. But I think if we sent out letters, we would have to field kind of, have a discussion with the property owner to see what was really viable and what they really were interested in pursuing, utilizing the SB9 incentives.
And that could most certainly be part of our outreach as we look at the SB9 units.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Councilmember Fredericks. All right, Councilmember Fredericks, please go ahead.
yeah, no, this is just, I all of a sudden realized that I hadn't focused on the vacant lots. Where are they? Is it mostly infill in neighborhoods?
Most of them are in the hills, and some of them are parcels. Some of them are large sites that are identified in the land use element right now by the property owner name. And so those are planned PDR sites.
Yeah.
And so they're all ready because they're in the land use now with a number of units that was assumed, they're larger properties. So some of them have a capacity of 8 units or 11 units. For those larger sites, we just carried over what was in the previous land use element into our draft land use element. We're assuming the same number. And then there are some other scattered sites that really that are just zoned for single family, that we're just counting, that would just support one single family home, and they really are. They're scattered all over, but mostly they're in the hills. They're pretty steep slopes, and
Yeah.
some of them, as we were going through, especially the vacant ones, are owned by the property owner of the lot next door. So there are people who have purchased 2 lots in order to have probably greater privacy or more yard. So
Yeah, please go ahead, John.
So I think actually to further answer that question and to clarify a question that I had, do you have the ability to put the red line housing element, a page from that up on the screen? Do you have that available?
I have to open it up. I don't know if Dina has it, but let me see if I can.
Because I'm looking at
What
page
did you want?
74 is a map of the sites, the
That's
sites
right.
map. So
Yeah.
maybe you have that elsewhere, but I just wanted to put up the sites maps to make sure that we.
Okay. I'm gonna have to open it up, and it just takes a little while to open.
Take a second.
If only we all had faster broadband.
It's the broadband, and it's my terrible.
That was
computer.
good, Alice. Yay. You get an A+ today.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, it's also just a large document, so it takes a while to
Sure, of course.
load. Okay, so it was page 74, did you say?
74 of the document, right? 78 of the PDF, I think. But
All right. Should have had it open before. Sorry about this. Almost there.
I think it's figure 46, yeah.
Okay, here we go. And I have to share my screen.
Great. Yeah, so yeah, and if you slide it up a little bit. There we go. So correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the purple sites are the multifamily sites
Yes.
primarily, and that the smaller green sites in the hills, are those SB9 sites or are those?
So those are all the vacant lots.
Those are all the vacant lots. So that's
some of them that we're
Alice, that's
counting
yeah.
for SB9. And this says mixed use. This is actually, this one here, I don't know if you could see my arrow. The Reed School
Yeah.
site is identified as mixed use.
Right.
It's not mixed, it's multifamily. So that really should actually say multifamily, not mixed. We can make that change.
Okay, and can you point out the Paradise site?
So the Paradise site would be this
Right
one
there.
right
That one,
here.
right there. Okay. All right, great. So yeah, so that I think that kind of, there are a few bigger sites, right? But most of the little sites, I presume, are SB9 sites that we're talking about.
That's correct, in the hills.
Yes, we were looking at all the smaller sites that are zoned single family. We did not look at, increasing density on the ones that are actually designated PDR sites.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And then I'm not going to make you go back to the other document, but on one of the pages, you had shown us all the possibilities that we've considered, and the total of the units was 698. I'm assuming, so I guess the question is, we had the buffer in before. Is there any justification for keeping any buffer in, or is there a buffer you recommend, or like what are we thinking about that from a consultant standpoint?
Well, you know, the reason for the buffer, it's not that it's required, because it certainly isn't. It's recommended by HCD, but the reason for the buffer is really because when and if you get a development proposal and it comes in and it doesn't have the very low and low income units that we're projecting, and it's lower than that, you have to go through the exercise and make sure that the remaining sites are still provide enough units capacity to provide for the low and very low. So if you have no buffer, because it's unlikely that a lot of the sites, I shouldn't say that, but so there's sites that we've identified that are mostly very low, and only an affordable housing developer is going to do those sites that way. If you get a market rate developer to do those sites, to develop the sites, then you're not going to get the very low and low units that we're projecting. So if you don't have a buffer, you're very quickly are likely to get into the no net loss law, which means that you're going to have to go through this whole exercise that we're doing right now and identify other sites, either new sites or increasing capacity and density on existing sites that are in the housing element. So the buffer really is just so that you don't have to do that no net loss law exercise when the time comes.
Understood. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, so.
Councilmember Fredericks?
Excuse me, yeah. So at first it was my understanding that one can downzone at any time, but in the staff report on objective standards, I learned for the first time that under SB 330, you can't downzone. So I think some of, at least my interest as a council member in reducing the buffer was thinking that we couldn't downzone. Then I had less trepidation because I thought we could downzone. And now I'm seeing this information, which I don't know fully or understand fully, under SB 330, that under certain projects or certain conditions, you can't downzone. Can someone clarify all that?
Well, my understanding is that you can the only way you could downzone is if you're increasing density on another site, so that you end up at a net zero change in your capacity. And the town attorney, if he has another interpretation of it, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, my concern was having a large buffer that is now upzoned and we can't downzone it. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you are looking at a project that's one of the projects on your a property that's on your inventory list coming forward, and that amount is not the amount that's subject to approval, is not the amount that is shown in our housing element, we can still approve it, assuming we have a buffer of other sites.
That's no net loss.
That's different.
Correct.
Yes.
She's
so
asking.
My question, yeah, go ahead,
I
John.
was just going to say, she's asking if once we put a site on the inventory housing list at a certain number, whether or not we can reduce that number in the future if we have enough elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that is correct. If you have, again, it ties into the net loss rule. You can go down if we have a buffer that has existing units. You can't downzone if we don't have other amounts in our housing element or in our housing inventory list that amount to the amount in the that satisfy our housing element obligation.
Right. So it's extremely unlikely that we would be able to downzone, in the sense that we would have to have generated more than expected low income housing, which is kind of in the opposite direction most people think it skews.
But I was thinking in the future, when we get the new arenas and we now have to identify more sites, and we've already upzoned sites and have no buffer for the next planning cycle, because I don't understand to what SB 330 prohibiting downzoning refers. And I'm assuming that we're not going to be downzoning things we need to meet our arenas. I'm looking at the position of the buffers with respect to downzoning.
Why don't we actually, even though Mayor Ryan politely suggested that we didn't need to put up that slide, I think we should actually put up the slide
Yeah.
so that we can see what the numbers are.
So which slide is it exactly?
The slide with the totals,
This
you know,
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
that one.
There you go.
So we do have a buffer here. We have a buffer of, you know, the
9%.
difference between the RENA line and the total is the buffer in each case, right? So our buffer overall is what, 51, 59.
Mhm.
So yeah, which is 9%.
Right.
And I have no objection to the buffer. I just want to know what the status is with respect to downzoning it if we don't need them to count toward arenas in this cycle.
I'm not entirely sure I quite understand that question.
Well,
I can clarify. We need 637 and we have X amount over. We actually end up with projects in that meet the 637 or whatever it is. It's 639 RENA. And now we have the buffer, which we have upzoned. Can we downzone it at some point? I thought the answer was yes, but then I saw in the report on objective standards some limits under SB 330 on what you can downzone in the staff report, and I just didn't understand what it applied to, what the
All right,
restriction on downzoning applies to.
So at the end of the RENA cycle, if what you're talking about in 8 years from now, we have to, do our next housing element, and we have leftover sites, we can evaluate those sites and figure out, what we want to do with those sites to meet our 7th cycle RENA, if that's the question, and we can downzone appropriately. SB 330 is different in that sites that are existing on our housing element inventory list that are, with the zoning that we're going to adopt when we adopt our housing element and with the objective standards, on those sites, we have to, if someone comes in with, I believe it's 20% affordability or 100% moderate, similar to the builder's remedy, but it's only for sites on the housing element. Those sites, we have to apply our objective design standards that are going to be reviewed by you and the Planning Commission as part of the adoption of the housing element. So SB 330 is not really, it's not the same issue as the no net loss rule.
Yeah.
Go forward in our next housing element in 8 years from now, when we're reviewing those.
Okay, but I still don't understand the reference in the staff report to SB 330 and the prohibition on downzoning. I don't understand it. And we can do it offline. I don't want to hang everybody up. Maybe everybody else understands it.
And Dina or Christine, please jump in if you have a better understanding. But in the staff report, that section is indicating that as we move through this cycle and a property comes in that's on our housing element inventory list, in certain circumstances, we can't decrease the density if they come in with an SB 330 application.
Oh, okay. So it's the SB 330 applications that can't be downzoned.
Correct, if they meet the qualifications under state law for those. Similar to an SB
That's
35 application.
Thank you. That was all I really needed. I'm sorry.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Clearer.
Anyone else have any questions for staff? Okay, so at this point, I'm going to open it up to public comment, and I'll just remind members of the public that you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and it would be great if you could start off by stating your name and where you live. And Madam Clerk, could you provide people instructions as to how to participate?
Yes, thank you. If you'd like to make a comment during this meeting, please use the raise hand feature of Zoom, which will indicate to me you'd like to make a comment. You can find the raise hand button on your webinar controls bar on the bottom of your Zoom window or smartphone screen. If you're using Zoom, I will invite you to turn your camera and microphone on to address the council. Please accept the request from the Zoom host that you're being promoted to a panelist. If you're calling in using a phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand, or you can submit an email to comments@townoftiburon.org. And with that, we can start with Robert Wong.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead. And you have 3 minutes, and please start off with your name and where you live.
Okay, my name is Robert Wong. I live in Reed Ranch. This plan sounds really good. I like the use of all the stuff that's the CVS. There's lots of space there. One question about the ADUs is that other counties have much better incentives to encourage homeowners to create ADUs. There's like loans and, some of the construction costs is being supplemented by the counties. Are in Marin and specifically in Tiburon, are we planning to do anything to help supplement the ADU costs other than lowering fees, which is a drop in the bucket, to encourage more ADUs?
Thanks for your comment. We will try to get back to you at the end of public comment with any clarifications if we can.
Next is Julie Jacobs.
Thank you so much for taking comments and for presenting this information today. And thank you very much for all your hard work. I think that you are now at a much better place for our town than we were just a short time ago. And I know it's taken concentrated effort, and we're grateful. Thank you very much. I have a few quick questions. One is regarding the amount of discretion for Site 5 lodged in the property owner regarding whether essential services downtown will be retained as a condition of development. And I wonder if you could discuss that and let us know if there's any way to make it a requirement that some of these services that make downtown living comfortable and reasonable can be retained as a condition. The second question is regarding the maximum heights in feet. I'm really grateful you've put this 3-story height restriction in. I'm a little confused about why at some places it's up to 45 feet, and then that's the mixed use and Main Street zoning districts in table 17. And in other places, it is a much lower height. 4.0 housing constraints table 16 for VC, NC, NCOHO building heights are 30 feet, 30 feet, 3 stories, or 38 feet. And I wondered if it'd be possible to get some clarification about that. The next question is regarding downtown sites. In the sites inventory table 11, environmental constraints, I wondered if you would please add liquefaction zone and tsunami hazard zone. And the last question is regarding as you were assessing parcels, the different factors the criteria that were under consideration included under number 2, within walking distance of public transit facilities and services. I wondered where that requirement came from. and whether it could be addressed by simply adding bus routes to locations where they don't already exist, so that then you would have public transit facilities and services within walking distance. Thank you so much for your kind consideration. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Julie.
Sure.
Do you see anybody else?
I am seeing no additional comments on this item.
Okay, thanks. So I'll close public comment and bring it back to council for deliberation. Although I would be curious to hear if staff, and I think staff talked about the site heights with respect to 45 last meeting, but I don't know if they talked about the discrepancy between where it's 38 in some places and 45 in another. And then also I just want to see if I'm making sense to the rest of the council that with respect to the services and for Christina and Dina, there is no guarantee that the services stay in the way we've structured the 3-story limit. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So for those sites, we have to allow 100% residential if they're on sites 1 through 9. The reason we were proposing the 4th-story bonus was as an incentive to have ground floor commercial. So we can look at other incentives, and I think when we bring forward the odds, that's a conversation that we can have. As far as the 45, that's just what's in the proposed odds. And I think there's another discussion that can be had for that. The reason that it's 45 is in order to allow, ground floor, we were talking about like the ground floor especially for commercial use is higher than like 11 feet. Also, if there's going to be stacked parking, if we're looking at some kind of creative ways to get more parked cars in there, that would need a higher base first floor as well. And then we also wanted to have pitched roofs, and so that we don't have flat roofs. So that's another reason to increase that height. Now there are the table 16 that identifies 35 and 38 feet. Those are the current existing standards. I'll go back to see if there's a conflict between that and what we've identified for the mixed use zones. So I'll have to check on that.
Okay.
And there was another question about why we identified walking distance from public transit. And that is because for tax credits, which is the major financing or funding tool that affordable housing developers use in order to get their financing for these projects, one of the things is a close ability to walk to services, to walk to jobs, walk to public transit. That's because lower income people generally are more likely to rely on public transit than have their own cars. And so that is something, it's not a requirement, but it is something that HCD actually in their guidelines for selecting sites does note that that's a good one to add.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Councilmember Sphere, please.
Yes, I had one more question. With respect to incentives for the ADUs that the gentleman brought up in public comment, are there other incentives that we could add? And if so, can they also be added at a future date?
So another, he was talking about financial incentives. I have seen other communities actually use their affordable housing funds, like the town has a low moderate housing fund. And they've used that to provide financing for people who also in exchange for a deed restriction on their second unit that says that they're going to actually rent it and rent it to a very low income household.
Okay.
So that might be something that the town wants. We could add that if the town wanted to look at that. The only thing I would say is that if we put something in the housing element that says that you're going to, HCD does not like using the words explore, consider. So if we put it in the housing element, we have to say adopt an ordinance that you're going to do this. So I think you should be relatively committed to actually taking the action.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. And as for deliberations, Councilmember Wellner, do you want to start us off? Thank you.
Sure. So I'd like to start off by thanking staff for doing a very nice job in both preparing the initial draft and then updating it in response to council comments. As I went through it today, I repeatedly thought to myself that you captured very well what the council said, and that's extra kudos, and that the meeting covered a lot of issues in a lot of different ways, and you guys have done a fine job of capturing what was, I think, intended by the council. I have a few specific comments that I'd like to suggest. And I guess the first one, though, I'll start with my last comment, which is that I'm curious what other council members think, but I don't think, in answer to staff's question, I don't think we need to adjust the 30 to 35 units to 31 to 35, because we already have not only the number we need, but also a buffer. And I think that's likely sufficient. With regard to specific comments, on page 91 of the redlined housing element, it's section 3.6. It has to do with the SB 9 incentives. I don't know if you could put that, Christine, if you could put that up on the screen. I could just say what the comment is. It might be easier if we were looking at it.
Did you say page 91, John?
Yeah, page 91.
It might be easier, Councilmember Wellner, simply because of time.
Okay, I'll just explain the comment. So this is the section where we talk about coming up with the 25%, and it says that there were 2 letters, and then it says based on those 2 letters we came up with 25%, and then it proceeds to describe a bunch of incentives that we're going to put in place to encourage people to look at SB 9. My minor comment is that I think it should say, based on those letters and the additional incentives that we're putting in place described below, we're estimating 25%, so that it's clear that it's not just based on the 2 letters, but it's based on our future efforts to encourage people to look at SB 9.
That's a great suggestion.
Great.
Thank you. With my next comment is, it really has to do, it's connected to page 71 in the red line, but it really has to do with the letter back to HCD and the response to comment 3. In the response to comment 3, this is responding to the comment by HCD asking us why we're concentrating all of this housing downtown. And I think your answer is thorough and good, saying, we took a look at the other potential parcels, and the owners expressed that they weren't interested. That's fine. I do think what we should add here, though, is we should definitely take advantage of the fact that we're now including parcel H, the Paradise Drive parcel, which is not downtown. And so it seems to me that we should add a sentence or a paragraph saying that, in addition, we're responding to your comment by identifying 93 units that will be about as far from downtown as they could be, almost out of town. And so anyway, I think that would be useful to point out there. On page 110, there's a description of the ministerial process that has to take place if someone qualifies under SB 330. This is just for the sake of clarity. It says the language in the text says, and let me just pull it up real quick on my screen so that I can get it right for you. Okay, it says as described above for all projects that are consistent with state law, i.e. Senate Bill 330, and then it goes on. I would say as described above for all projects that qualify under state law, to make clear that we're talking only about a limited number of projects that qualify under Senate Bill 330. And that's it. Those are my comments. I think otherwise, as I said, I think you've done a great job. I think the key factors for the council were maintaining a height limit downtown, taking up Mr. Crandall's offer with regard to Paradise Drive in order to decrease the pressure that exists on downtown, and eliminating that bonus of a fourth floor for commercial. I know the mayor has a little heartburn about that, but I think we'll be able to create incentives for people to maintain commercial without promising them extra height, which I think is something that people are very sensitive to. But otherwise, I think this is a great effort, and I'm very pleased to recommend that you, with those changes, submit it to HCD.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Councilmember Fredericks, please.
Yes, I just want to make two comments. One is painfully trivial, and the other is just a suggestion. I thought that the housing element and the responses to HCD really made it clear what the town has to deal with to increase housing density, and it was a good job. I appreciate the read, and I appreciate what I think will be the effect on HCD, and if it isn't, they're wrong. So I wanted to make a general suggestion in support of why downtown concentration, as much as none of us are excited about it, really isn't that bad. And if there's a place either in the response to HCD comments or in the housing element itself, to emphasize that downtown is actually close to community gathering places and to activities that are important, especially to people who are living in small, affordable housing units, such as the town plaza, the library and its programs, Main Street and community events. So it isn't just sticking people in some one crowded place. There are actually wonderful places where the community comes to this place and people who live there can reach out to the community. There may not be a place for those thoughts, but if there are, I wanted to make it a possibility. The trivial one has to do with people like me who read fast and miss things. I was looking at some of the data on the housing element draft, like the figure on page 23, and I thought the labeling of the figures could be a little clearer to make it clear that the data is about Tiburon. It's really clear in the text, but when you look at the figure itself, it isn't. There's a label under the figures that says universe, and maybe it's in that place is a place to make it clear that this particular figure is about Tiburon. If it doesn't work, that's fine. Most people read more carefully than I do. And thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thanks, Councilmember Fredericks. Councilmember Thier, please go ahead.
Sure. I want to start off by thanking staff. I know how much time and energy has gone into getting us where we are today. And I also know how much confusion there's been along the way. And, normally when we're presented with a task, we understand it from the get-go and the rules aren't changing. And I think in this case, it's been a little bit difficult because, we're not 100% sure. I also want to thank the public because your comments, your participation, all of the work that you did really helped us to get where we are today. And I think some of the critical issues of, preventing the height limitations from being out of character with the neighborhood going to like 4 stories. I'm glad that that's been corrected and that we will not have heights as was in the previous draft. I think also, having spreading around some of the housing has also been great, and a big thanks to Mr. Crandall for that. And then I also wanted to say that I do actually agree with what John said about not adding in going from 30 to 31 units on the already identified parcels. I just don't think we need to do that at this moment. That would also give us something else to do later if HCD does come back and deny something. And then the last thing was, John, what was the last thing you mentioned?
Oh, last thing that I mentioned.
Yeah, there was two things.
One
Beyond the height.
one was the SB9, and then the other was the including the Paradise parcel in the explanation of why we weren't downtown.
Yes. Yeah, and I was gonna actually say the same thing, that I think a good paragraph on that, emphasizing that comment was heard and that some of the parcels are going to be not downtown. I do think that needs to be emphasized a little more. And I also just wanted to also thank John. He had a lot of comments and a lot of participation, and I think it really helped get us to the draft that we're at now. So I want to thank you also for your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm proud. I'm proud of Tiburon. I'm proud of our staff. You know, a lot of towns haven't even submitted to HCD yet. So we are really, we're really on time and ahead of that process. So, you know, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Councilmember Fair. Could you just,
Mayor,
Councilmember Wellner,
just
please.
a quick, Holly was just saying, thanks for the comments. I have one more comment, which is, I just want to tack on to what Councilmember Frederick said about amenities downtown. I think in their response to their comment that we were putting everything downtown, that same response number 3, or response to comment number 3, I think that would be a good place to put some of that, which is, you know, first to say that downtown is a good place, and then secondly to say, and we also expanded out of downtown. One additional amenity that exists downtown that is, of course, critical to mention is the ferry, which is in fact the public transportation that led to the high number to begin with. So, you know, it's a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit ironic that HCD would criticize us for putting people downtown when in fact the reason for the high number is that there's a ferry downtown. So I do think that's also worth mentioning.
Yeah, that's very well articulated. And so I'm not going to just wrap this up and cleanly, that would be too easy. But first, I do want to say thanks to the staff for the quick turnaround. It hasn't even been a full 7 days, and I appreciate you guys coming back with this great product for us, as my colleagues have said. And I definitely agree with Councilmember Wellner's comments on pages 71, 91, and 110 on the changing the content and the text to reflect better what we mean. And totally agree on the 31 as a minimum density being superfluous at this point. There's no reason to do that. I do want to ask my fellow council members, though, is there any, should we consider lowering the number of properties on the 4576 Paradise, because we have a buffer, and it's, you know, right now with 93 would be 21 properties above the above moderate income units, and just, I mean, is there any reason to lower it, or are we good with 93? I guess is my question.
Good.
I think if we're allowed to use those units later, then it does make a lot of sense.
Okay.
But I want to hear from staff what their thoughts are.
I agree with Holly.
Okay.
And I would just say I'm a little worried about lowering it in that it sounded to me like the SB9 numbers would have to be accepted in order for us to be able to lower the Paradise number at all.
That was going to be my caution.
And so my fear is I would submit both. And then if they, I don't think they should reject the SB9 estimate, but if they do, we'll still be safe.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, so thank you. So at this point, we have been, it is a recommendation of the staff that we accept by public comment and approve by minute order this direction. So Attorney Stock, do you have any recommendations on how I actually make that happen?
Yeah, I think what we'd want to see from the council today is a motion to approve by minute order the current draft to be submitted to HCD with the amendments as proposed by Council Member Wellner.
So is anyone willing to make that motion?
So moved.
All right,
Second.
thanks. And Councilor, all right, Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll on the vote?
Councilmember Fredericks,
Yes.
Councilmember Thier,
Yes.
Councilmember Wellner,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin is absent, and Mayor Ryan.
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you. That wraps up action item 1. Action item 2, the second and final item of the day, is to consider adoption of a resolution that would identify objective design standards for the review of qualified residential projects in compliance with the state housing laws. Do you have does the staff have a report or a presentation?
I have a very brief report because I think it's a rather simple thing I'm bringing forward to you after all of what you've had to do for the last whatever time. So what we have done in this resolution is go through our existing standards and incorporate those into a resolution that will allow us to have standards by which we can review development projects that come in for qualified affordable housing or multiple unit housing. So all of what you see in the exhibit, I think I called it Exhibit A of your resolution, are standards that already exist within our code, but I'm applying it to qualifying projects. So we don't end up with somebody walking in with an SB 35 project, for instance, and I have nothing in which to deem them complete or not with. I just simply have to slide them through the door. So this allows us some ability to look at the design attributes and some physical attributes of the projects. And this is only, I think that Councilmember Wellner penned it as a stopgap resolution. So what I would say is that this provides us this gap between now and when we actually adopt our permanent objective design standards that you will be reviewing at the next meeting, and then we'll be moving forward through the process. And until such time as it's actually adopted as an ordinance and part of our text, this will protect us in many ways. So that's really what we're asking you to do today, is to adopt this resolution, which is Exhibit 1, identifying the objective design development standards for review of qualified residential projects in compliance with state housing law. Provide us some buffer in between there. I don't know if I want to use buffer, a stopgap. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thanks, Tina. Does anyone have any questions for Tina? Councilmember Wellner, please.
So very thankful that you guys were able to put this together for this meeting. A couple of questions because, as it's written, it refers to sections of the code. So for those of us who are not deeply versed in what the code currently contains, it kind of leaves open a question about what exactly these standards are. I guess I just have some basic questions. Do these standards include, and this is for the, for the parcels downtown, do they include a height limit? Do they include setback? Do they, what are the basic, they include a lot more than a few things, but what are the basic parameters that are set forth in these objective standards?
So I think if you look at Chapter 16, the zoning portion of what we include in this resolution, it does allow us to do height limits, etc. because we're looking at residential zones, allowable land uses and permit requirements, and then development standards. So we have applied those to the downtown.
Okay,
to
so
these
I
qualifying
mean, so what is the height, under these standards, what is the height limit for downtown until the new zoning is adopted?
It would be 35, it could go to 38.
Okay, 35 feet
Mhm.
or 38 feet, okay.
3 stories. I mean, most of what we see is a 3-story.
And then,
What is
and what,
permitted, excuse me.
and what would the, and again, I don't know if this is always going to be the same, but what would the setback be?
So it depends.
Yeah, I figured it
Yeah,
would, because
it
I know
does
Main Street is
depend.
0, right? But
Yeah, and some of the ones along Tiburon would be 0 as well. But we would be able to at least get the height, and we'd be able to articulate the building in such a manner so you wouldn't just have somebody coming in with a straight wall that goes up. So we would be able to articulate and go through a design process whereby we could look at how we could kind of, for lack of a better word, have some movement in the building rather than a straight wall. So yes, just like we
okay,
can.
because we wouldn't be able to have a discretionary process, right? It would have to be laid out objectively in the standards.
That's correct.
presume.
And it is in the standards. And so we would do it as kind of our staff review. So, but we wouldn't have.
To
we
make
wouldn't
sure
have
that
to
it's
apply this.
consistent with the standards, right? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, but for now, based on the objective standards that we already had in the code that are called out in this resolution, the height limit downtown is 35 to 38 feet or so. And it's not, we're not going to be surprised by, you know,
No,
8-story buildings or something like that, right?
no. And that was part of the intent, is to put that in there so we could.
Okay,
apply
all right,
those.
very good.
So,
Thank you.
Councilmember Fredericks, go ahead, please.
yeah, so in the staff report, there was a mention of a prohibition of the application of subjective standards established after January 1st, 2020, under SB 35, streamlining.
Mhm.
What subjective standards do apply? I thought they didn't if it was within the scope of these kinds of projects.
You know,
Okay,
That's-
so the prohibition of application of subjective standards established after January 1st, 2020 applies to what?
maybe I'll ask our town attorney to do that one, so I
Yeah,
don't mess up the law.
It's in the staff report and I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, SB 35 was enacted several years ago, and it prohibits the town from imposing subjective standards.
Yeah,
That's one set of projects. And then another set of projects are SB 330 projects, which we talked about the last agenda item. Certain qualifying projects under SB 330 also prohibit the imposition of subjective standards.
okay, so my question was about the sentence in the staff report that I took notes on about the prohibition of the application of subjective standards established after January 1st, 2020 under SB 35 streamlining. I couldn't understand what that was about.
We cannot impose subjective standards that have been enacted after that date, 2020, to SB 35 projects.
But you can apply subjective standards developed before that date?
No, that's a little unclear in the law,
Yeah.
but it's certainly clear after that date.
Okay, so the reason I didn't understand it is that it isn't clear in the law.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Thank you.
I have one follow-up question about objective standards again. So we talked about height. Do the objective standards that exist impose any density limits downtown?
Let me look at what we got in here. Well, each residential zone has those standards. So the zone itself has a density standard.
For
But
downtown?
yeah, let me just check that to make sure. Let me move you. Just gonna look at the downtown zone to make sure I can answer your question completely.
Sure, no problem. Take your time.
Here we go. We do have height limits of up to 30 feet in the residential zones. And now I'm going to go to your NC, which is a lot of downtown. It's 30 feet. We have a 30-foot height limit. And the density of, yeah, we don't have densities as well. Yeah, but I don't, yeah, unless I'm missing something here. We do have a, we look at it as square feet per unit. So we do have a 3,500 square foot per unit. So we do have a density in that way. We don't talk about density per acre within.
Is
our
that
current code.
is that a minimum or a maximum? That's a maximum. No.
Yeah. No, it's 30. You have to have 35 square feet per dwelling unit in the R3.
3,500.
And the minimum, and you have to have a minimum lot size as well. Of 10,000 square feet in the R3. And in the commercial zones, because that's a sum of downtown, does have a commercial zoning. The minimum lot area is 10,000 square feet. And we have an FAR. We use the floor area ratios there.
Yeah, I guess I'm
I don't actually have a dwelling density currently.
right. The 3,500 square feet for an apartment is pretty big. Is that right?
So just so you know, our residential development currently doesn't actually call out apartments. It calls out 2 and 3 unit dwellings. So we don't actually have, we have a minimum required open space. We have efficiencies, have to be certain square footages, as well as 3 and 4 dwelling units. And then most of what we look at for densities within a residential are applied through our residential master plans and plan developments, whereby we look at it and develop that density at that time. So I don't have it laid out here in particular, you know, X number of dwelling units per acre.
So just from a practical point of view, if someone were to take one of those sites downtown and submit a builder's remedy application, we would have the ability to apply the height limit. But we don't have a density limit. I guess
We use an FAR in the, so in downtown, a lot of those properties are not currently zoned residential per se. You're looking at a more commercial area. And so you would be looking at a minimum lot area and then an FAR. So that's how we would determine.
okay, so the density would be determined by, they could make the units as small as they wanted, I suppose, but the density would be determined by the height limit combined with the
FAR, the lot.
with the horizontal limits,
Exactly.
As a block, yeah.
Okay.
How much they could cover of the lot. So it's unfortunate that we don't really have a residential kind of dwelling units per acre.
Yeah, I mean, no one was anticipating this legislation, so it doesn't pre-exist. But
So your
okay,
question
so
is good, but I don't have a way to tell you
but we have some objective constraints on the size and scale of builders remedy developments downtown based on
And,
what you're
you know,
saying.
looking at residential developments within that area, because we would have to allow it within there, within a regularly commercial area.
Right.
We do have a maximum lot coverage as well, if we wanted to apply that, which is the 30% for maximum. And we have setback requirements for residential. So it's kind of, we'd have to play a little bit around with it, because we obviously we've never thought about it in our code.
Okay.
That's why people applied things like development plans and precise development plans, I think, which answered some of this absence of dwelling units per acre that we have and don't have in our code.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any other questions, Steph?
Yeah, just,
Yeah, please, Councilmember Fredericks.
so with respect to the objective standards, is there more information, other decisions to be made down the line? I realize this is probably, is this just stopgap or is this?
Yes, this is just a stopgap. So you're not making any changes to the existing or legislation that we have in place or the code that we have in place. What you're doing today is to say, what we have in place, we're going to apply in this resolution for objective design standards for projects that meet the criteria of this housing, the new housing laws, right? To meet state housing law. And then once it sort of provides us this timeline between now and adopting the ordinance, the objective design standards that will apply to the new sites for the affordable housing, or, you know, what we've indicated as housing sites or opportunity sites. Right now, I don't have that. So this gives me some way to, when someone comes in, to determine completeness. I can apply some standards that exist from our code that I couldn't before.
Thank
So
you.
that's why we called it so creatively stopgap. Fills in that gap and stops people from just running through my door.
Our door.
That's right.
Yes, our door. I'm sorry, but you know, I'm just thinking of where I'm living at town hall, like the door that people come through. And maybe Ben wants to add.
I just want to clarify what the community development director said. These are existing standards that we would be able to apply if someone came in tomorrow, even if you didn't adopt this resolution. It just puts them in a much more clear light for someone walking in the door. And I should also mention, as the resolution states, we also have objective standards in our general plan, and those also apply. Those aren't listed, but they're incorporated by reference in the resolution.
Great.
Thanks,
Great.
Ben. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Okay, thanks. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for public comment. Madam Clerk, if you could please start letting people in, and I'll remind people that you have 3 minutes to speak, and if you could please state your name and where you live before you begin, that would be great. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. First is going to be Doreen Curtis.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, yes, Doreen, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Doreen Curtis, and I'm a resident of Point Tiburon since 1987. And I do want to thank you all for all the progress that's been made in the last few weeks to get this to this point. I want to thank all of you on the town council and staff and consultants. I'm just really confused about the odds. There is a draft set of odds, I believe, that was discussed at a recent, I can't remember if it was a planning commission meeting or design standards or what. I know that draft is out there somewhere. I'm just wondering if I haven't read it again recently to know, but I'm wondering if it might make sense to try and adopt some of that now, because I know it was addressing things like what can they make these buildings look like? They can't use brick, they can't do this. I mean, people put a lot of thought into what we could now call objective design standards that would limit, you know, having the outside look horrible, frankly. And also, I don't know how it addressed it, but if I understand what you're saying right now, you're saying that we would have a 3-story limit everywhere, but the housing element is going to have a 2-story limit on a lot of those sites. And so I'm not sure how that plays or whether that was addressed in the draft odds that are out there right now. So I'm just wondering if it might be worth considering further adopting some of those. And I guess my last question related to that is, if a developer were to come in the interim with their application, and then later we adopt the odds, would they become subject to the new odds, or would they, get out of it because they submitted their application before they existed? And I appreciate any answers to those questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Doreen.
Next is Julie Jacobs.
Thank you. I'm Julie Jacobs, and we live downtown right now and also have a property near the Cove Shopping Center. And I would like to just have two quick questions. Is there a reason why we would not want to, in this stopgap measure, specifically put in a 3-story height limitation, make it clear and explicit? And secondly, regarding setbacks, the housing element says that there is an intention to provide housing for seniors and disabled people who would like to be downtown and have easy access to the amenities downtown. If there is 0 setback, I'm wondering whether it would be possible to include a ramp to make raised entrances to address flooding risks accessible to seniors and disabled people. And so I'm wondering if we need an explicit setback in that to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Madam Clerk, do you see anybody else who wants to speak?
I'm seeing no additional comments.
Okay, thanks. So I'll close the public comment period now. And Councilmember Wellner, please go ahead.
So Doreen and Julie asked great questions, and unfortunately the answers are not ideal. The reason that we can't adopt any new objective standards at this stage is because we need to have a completed environmental impact report in order to adopt new standards. And the timeline we received at our last meeting for completion of the EIR was in May. I'm hoping we can move that up substantially, but nonetheless, it's not today. So we're unable, even though, as you articulate, there are objective design standards that are being developed that we really need to have downtown with regard to height and design and all kinds of features of potential developments there. What this resolution is a clarification of existing objective standards in one place so that we know and developers know precisely what the limits are now. And then once we are able to complete the EIR and adopt the housing element, then we'll adopt new zoning and have these new features in place. So while your suggestion is a great one, it's not something that we can do. The other part of the question that was asked is whether or not, if standards change, if builders have to adapt to the new standards. And that actually is the issue with the builder's remedy, namely if they submit a preliminary application prior to our adoption of the odds, the new objective standards, then they're entitled to live with the existing ones. And so that, in a nutshell, is why we are moving as quickly as possible, racing to get our EIR done so that we can adopt a housing element and new zoning as quickly as possible in order to constrain development downtown in a way that will make it not only provide new affordable housing, but also be beautiful and useful and conform to objective design standards that we adopt.
Thank you. That was very well said. Do we have any discussion from the council members on this item? And if not, I'd be happy to entertain a motion to adopt the resolution.
Well,
So moved.
I'm sorry, I have one quick comment,
Yeah,
which
please,
is
go ahead.
that I do think it's unfortunate that we aren't able to adopt our full new objective standards prior to the January 31st deadline. And I urge staff to move as quickly as possible to complete an EIR so that we can adopt the housing element, and that we should, the language that's being used is self-certify, but that we should adopt our new housing element as quickly as possible, even prior to certification by HCD. And then once we get certification by HCD, we can then modify the housing element to conform to that. But we should adopt a housing element as quickly as possible in order to ensure that development downtown is subject to our review.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. Anybody else have any comments or question or deliberation? So would anyone like to make the motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Second,
Madam Clerk, can you call the roll for the vote, please?
Councilmember Fredericks,
yes,
Councilmember Thier,
Yes.
Councilmember Wellner,
Yes,
Vice Mayor Griffin is absent, and Mayor Ryan.
Yes. Thank you. So the motion passes 4-0. And that brings us to the end of the agenda and therefore the end of the meeting. Thank you, everybody, in the
Thank you.
public and on the council and the staff for participating.
thank you.
Have a great
Thank you.
afternoon.